Every week, this is something that we do on Sunday mornings at 10 a.m. So if you're new with us, we'd love to invite you back to that in the new year. And we have been going through a sermon series in the book of Philippians. And so this is one of the books in the New Testament. There's the Old Testament, the writings of the people of God before Jesus came, and the New Testament is the writings after Jesus came. And so this is a letter written by the Apostle Paul to a church that he helped to start in the city of Philippi. And so we've been going through that, and where we're at in the book, in chapter 2, there's a little place that talks about, for those of us who are filled with love because of what God's done for us, we are to shine like stars in the world. And so we've been doing this little Advent mini-series about the strange light that comes from knowing God. And so we're in the third night of that teaching, and so tonight we get to talk about the strange love of God. And I'll just show you this. It's kind of funny. I went to print my sermon notes this morning, and somebody, I think it was Ryan, had left a check, okay? We print out our checks, and he left a check. You see that? And it just happened to print that right perfectly on the line, pay to the order of, it says, the advent of the strange love. So we are going to pay to the order of the advent of strange love tonight. We're going to make a deposit in our understanding of what this strange love is. So I thought that was pretty fun. I thought I'd share it with you guys. So what is Advent, you might be asking, if you're not familiar. Advent is just a Latin word that means coming. So we celebrate at this time of year the coming of God into the world. And so we believe that this has happened, as Christians, we believe this has happened through the person of Jesus Christ, who is God who took on human flesh. So Jesus Christ was fully God and fully man through this miraculous, divine, mysterious thing called the incarnation. And it's beyond our pay grade. We just know that God has done this through the power of the Holy Spirit. And so that's what we celebrate, his coming into the world in a language that we can understand in the form of a human being. And so we can know what God is like because we can look at Jesus and his life. But we also believe and celebrate in anticipation that Jesus said he will come again and he will reestablish a commingled heaven and earth. So the two things that are separated now because of sin and darkness will become fully integrated once again when Jesus returns or advents for the second time. So at this time of year we celebrate both the first coming 2,000 years ago, but also Jesus coming again at some point in the future. And so what we've been sort of studying as we've gone is this sort of confusing or strange dilemma that we're in. We can study in the Old Testament before Jesus came prophecies. Tylene mentioned one in Isaiah 9 about this coming Messiah, which is actually the Hebrew word for the word Christ. So when we say Jesus Christ, we're just saying Jesus Messiah. But it was prophesied that he'd come. It says a child will come, and his name will be Wonderful Counselor. His name will be Prince of Peace. His name will be God with us. And so this was anticipated that a strange light would come. And then, of course, in the New Testament, we see this strange light did come in the person of Jesus. And he came in a way that people didn't anticipate. He came humbly, and he came sort of without any fanfare, and he didn't come to a royal family. He didn't come with any title or power or anything like that. He came in a strange way, and so we see the strange light came, and then what happens is Jesus lives his life, and he dies a death on a cross. He's executed, and then Christians believe that Jesus rose from the dead, that God brought him back to life, to prove that the sacrifice that Jesus had made was sufficient, that it was finished, that it was enough, and that all who turned to Jesus for reconciliation with God would be granted grace. And so then you would expect, okay, this is great. The light was predicted, the light came, the light died. We thought that the light went out, but the light didn't go out. The light came back on, and now Jesus lives among us. But then he says, after 40 days of teaching and explaining all that has happened, he says, now I have to go. And the disciples, his followers, look at him and say, wait, what? Now you're going? Why are you going? Where's the light going to be? Is it going to be dark again? And so we created this graph, at which point Jesus said, you'll be all right. And then he ascended into heaven, and the Bible says he sits at the right hand of God, the threefold God, God the Father, God the Son, and the Spirit, now ruling and reigning from heaven. And he said, I will send you the Helper, which is the Holy Spirit. And so when we look at this graph we created, we have the strange light predicted by Isaiah 700 years before Jesus came. We have 2,000 years ago, the strange light came in Jesus, and then Jesus says, I will come again. But we have this gap in the middle, show that next slide there, Phil, which seems like a darkness gap. And I didn't make this graph, Pastor Ryan made this graph. He's predicted we're about right there in the darkness gap. So you'll have to talk to him. I don't know exactly where we are. But it feels like, oh no, we're living in utter darkness. But then we come and we read about this other thing that Jesus predicted, that he said would happen. And I'll read it for you. It's in Philippians chapter 2, and that's why we've been talking about it, because we've been in Philippians. I'll just read it for you. We'll put it on the screen behind me. The Apostle Paul writes, inspired God, every word is inspired by God, it's breathed out by God, but through the pen of Paul. And Paul writes this, he says, for it is God who is working in you, both to will and to work according to his good purpose. Do everything without grumbling and arguing, so that you may be blameless and pure, children of God who are faultless in a crooked and perverted generation, among whom you shine like stars in the world. By, how do we do this? By holding firm to the word of life. And if you study elsewhere in the scriptures, Jesus is called the Word, and he is the word of life. So by holding on to Jesus, by holding on to his message of the gospel, of what God has done through his son Jesus, you might become like stars in the world. And so what we actually realize, and sometimes if you're a Christian in the room, you might say, I'm not sure this is better news, but it is some news, that actually it's not darkness, but, show the next slide there, Phil, on our chart, but actually we are, as Jesus' followers, the new strange lights in the world. So the strange light was predicted, the strange light came in Jesus, now he's left us to be empowered by him. Did you see what it said there in Philippians 2? It says, for it is God who is working in you. So it's not our own power, but it's God who's actually shining through us if we allow him to, so that we become the strange light in the world. And then one day Jesus will come back, and that doesn't mean we get to stop being strange lights, but now the light comes and restores all things and drives out all darkness. So now we live in sort of the in-between, sometimes it's called the already but the not yet, which has the commingling of light and darkness. And we get the pleasure and privilege, responsibility, and it's a heavy one at times, to be light in a dark place. And so, the question we've been asking is, well, what is this strange light look like? How do we know it's the strange light of Christ and not some other kind of light, some artificial light, or maybe even darkness, right? Because historically, those who have called themselves Christians have not always been the good kind of strange light. We have to just sort of lead with lament on that. And we have to long for those who call themselves Christians to grow into the fullness of what that actually means. So I said this last week, just because somebody says that they're a Christian doesn't mean they are. In fact, the best way to know if somebody is actually a Christian is, do they have the kind of strange light that we've been talking about, whether that's the strange light of peace or the strange light of hope or the strange light of joy, and like we'll talk about tonight, the strange light of love. That's actually the best way, not just because somebody self-declares that. So hopefully this is freeing for you, some of you, that you're like, oh good, I thought anybody who just said they were a Christian is. No. To be a Christian means to be fully surrendered to what God has done for you through Jesus Christ, the cross and the resurrection, and to have received the Spirit of Christ, the Spirit of God, the Holy Spirit, that's something that's living in you. And these are the ways that God works that out in you to be the strange light in the world. And it's all so strange. No one expected that this Jewish carpenter's son would be worshipped in his own day let alone 2,000 years later, by billions of people across the world. It's so strange that that happened, right? It's so strange that there are people still talking about this Jesus. It almost seems like perhaps there is something supernatural about him. Now, there was a sociologist who actually felt that exact way. And he used to teach for many years over at University of Washington. His name was Rodney Stark. And Rodney Stark felt the same way. He said, this is so strange that Christianity became what it became. And it happened so fast. And it eventually became the official worldview of the Roman Empire. How in the world did that happen? And as an intellectual and a scholar, he was so baffled by that he set out to sort of study outside of his normal domain. So he wanted to get into ancient history. But he was a sociologist, and so he began his study, and he worked with his colleagues, and he studied, and he tried to put together an account from a sociological perspective of how the rise of Christianity could have possibly taken place. And so he wanted to explain it without explaining it with God, because he was not a Christian. He would consider himself an agnostic, but he did not believe that God working in the world could have been a part of the answer. And so he decides to write a book, and he wrote a book called, creatively, The Rise of Christianity. Now I want to read to you how he opens his book. Okay, we'll have it on the screen behind me and you can follow along. This is the first page of his book. He writes this: how was it done? How did a tiny, obscure messianic movement from the edge of the Roman Empire dislodge classical paganism and become the dominant faith of Western civilization? It's so strange. How did this happen? Although this is the only question, it requires many answers. No one thing led to the triumph of Christianity. The chapters that will follow will attempt to reconstruct the rise of Christianity in order to explain why it happened. But in this chapter, I will pose the question in a more precise way, that has more precise way than has been done before. First, I shall explore the arithmetic of growth to see more clearly the task that had to be accomplished. What is the minimum rate of growth that would permit the Christian movement to become as large as it must have been in the time that history allows? How did it grow so fast? I'm going to try to show that to you with arithmetic. Did Christianity grow so rapidly that mass conversions must have taken place, as is attested to in the book of Acts, and every historian from Eusebius to Ramsay McMullen has believed? Having established a plausible growth curve for the rise of Christianity, I will review sociological knowledge of the process by which people convert to new religions in order to infer certain requirements concerning social relations between Christians and the surrounding Greco-Roman world. The chapter concludes with a discussion of the legitimate uses of social scientific theories to reconstruct history in the absence of adequate information on what actually occurred. Okay, so I can barely read that because this is high-level academic language. So you see here's somebody that's so baffled by the rise of Christianity that they're going to try to explain it. And he says, I'm going to need many answers. Not one thing I say is going to explain the whole thing. I'm going to have to pull in many different sociological phenomena to try to explain the rapid rise of Christianity. How did it go from this tiny sect in this distant outpost of the Roman Empire to the place where Constantine, the emperor himself, becomes a Christian? And by the time that happened, Stark will say, already a third of the empire was Christian. And so Stark will make the case that he doesn't think that Constantine became a Christian and therefore forced everybody to be Christians. He said Constantine saw that there were so many Christians and they were like a new political force in the empire, and so he thought, yeah, I should consider that. Interesting. Now, without getting into too much of the detail about each of these factors that he lays out in the 9 chapters, I'll describe one so you can see what I really want you to take away from this is what is, when I say strange love, what is it exactly that I'm talking about? It might not be what you think. So one example that Stark gives is he'll say that in the wake of disastrous plagues and a series of natural disasters, including earthquakes, he'll say that Christianity offered a much more satisfactory account of why these terrible things had befallen humanity. And their projection of hopefulness and enthusiasm about the future, that this actually explains why Christians were able to cope with these disasters better than the average Roman, which therefore helped Christians survive at higher rates than the pagans. Interesting. Isn't that interesting? They were like super optimistic, and that helped them with their mental health, which helped them survive when things got hard. Well, that's interesting. And then he'll go on to say that it's not only that, but that these Christians, because of their commitments, because of the strange love that they had, actually stayed in the communities that were plagued, where people would die, rather than the non-Christians who, if they could, would flee the cities and run to a mountain hideaway or something, a second home somewhere else where the plague hadn't yet hit, or they'd go go back to a family, other places to avoid, and Christians would stay. And so then he says, then when those people who did survive the plague got better, the only people around them were both those who were caring for them that happened to be Christians most of the time, or even if it wasn't Christians who were caring for them, there were just more Christians around still, and that was the social network or community that it made most sense to join. You see how he's using sociological, scientific reasoning to try to explain how it is that Christianity rose. Because he can't use God as an answer. And it's fascinating. And what I want to say to you is that I don't think that Rodney Stark is wrong. I think actually what he says is probably what happened. Is that there was a type of fear that the average person had that was totally natural, and that even Christians had, but something compelled Christians to stay. And all these sociological phenomenon followed. And that was part of the rise of Christianity. Now think about this for a second. Everything that the Christians did was natural in a sense. It's a natural explanation for growth. But what's not natural is the reason why they did natural things. Like, it's very unnatural to consider others as more important than yourself. What was it that compelled them to do that? So they're doing natural things, but what's the why, is what I'm trying to say. Like, you always have to ask the next question, what is the why? Okay, Rodney Stark, this happened, but why did it happen? Can you answer why it happened? And I think the why is that this strange kind of love somehow got into these Christians. Now you could say that they were all crazy. That is one explanation. But maybe there's another explanation. Maybe that strange love that they had been loved with by Jesus affected the way they loved other people. That's what Paul says will happen. That's God working his love out through his people. So Stark does this again and again, where he'll share a natural, sociological reason why the community of Christians grew. But if you ask the question behind the question and ask, well, why did they love like that? You might come up with a very different answer. Now, one of the ways I like to describe this pattern that Stark keeps kind of coming up against with his sociological hypothesis is what I like to call being supernaturally natural. So many times people will come to Sideris and they'll say, and I'll talk to them after they've been here for a while, and I say, what was the thing that brought you to Sideris? And they'll say, well, the community. And that's great. Sometimes I've heard people going to other church and they go there because the preaching is good, but people come to Sideris for the community, which is great. And I love that, so I'm not worried about that. I'm not fishing for compliments here. But what I am trying to tell you is that even though they say we came for the community, the question is, what is it about the community that surprised you? And then they'll explain that. Say, well, why do you think that is? Well, I don't know. It's different than any other community I've been a part of. Okay, I agree with you. Well, why is that? I don't know. And what I'm trying to help you see and even ask is, maybe there's an answer to the why that's somehow rooted in the strange love of Christ. I think that's what's strange about Sideris, is that for whatever reason, this strange love of Christ has gotten into our community and it works itself out through these people to the point where there's people here that I am friends with that if you had told me this 10 years ago, I would have laughed at you. No way I'm best friends with this person or that person. No way. But there's something about the community. So it's a supernaturally natural reason why the message of Christ continues to move and change lives and bring people together. And I think it's a beautiful thing. So fast forward in Rodney Stark's life, he wrote this book trying to explain from purely sociological science how Christianity could have risen as fast as it did. And he finishes the book. And like I said, it's not a Christian book at all. But it starts to, all this investigation, all this research starts to sort of mess with him. He's like, this is strange why this happened. And he wrote, I think, a couple other books. And then eventually, he changed his tune. And he couldn't deny anymore what he had investigated. And he became a Christian. And he said, you know what? I might be able to explain the natural, but I can't explain the supernatural behind the natural. And he himself, before he died in the 2010s, he became a Christian. And he said, the evidence is too undeniable that there is something behind the sociology that just doesn't make sense without God. And that might be something that happens to you as well. If you're not yet a Christian, I'm going to explain 4 ways in which I see this strange love playing itself out, both in my own life and in the life of people that I know who also know Christ and dwell with Christ. And so I'm going to share these with you. And if you're not yet a Christian in the room, I think I would just ask the question, do you wish these things were true? Do you wish this kind of love was available or more bright in the world, you might say? And if you come to wish that these things were true, maybe you spend some time investigating, like Rodney Stark did, whether they are true, in fact, in a supernatural way. Okay? Now, before I share these 4 ways that the strange light plays itself out, I don't want to be misunderstood. I don't want anyone to think that I think this could never happen or never does happen outside of the Christian community. I do believe that this can happen outside of the Christian community and does happen. And I have friends that love sometimes in these ways. But the reason for that is because every human being, the Bible teaches us, is created in the image of God. So God is a God who loves like this. He is the God who loves in this strange way. And so if we're created in His image, then we all have the capacity to do that. The problem is that sort of gets built over by these other ways of loving that are different than the strange love. And so I do believe that only with the help of the Spirit of God, living in you, helping you, can these strange patterns be sustained over time. And so I believe those who live their life in the presence of this strange light, like one of the analogies I've been using is I have these stickers for my boys that glow in the dark, but they only glow if I hold the stickers up to the light. And that took me like forever to figure out. I thought I got bamboozled. I was like, these things don't glow. But then I found out if I hold them up to the light, they'll glow for like 10 minutes, and then I got to hold them up again. It works the same way. If you want to love and glow with this strange light of Christ, you've got to get near to Christ. You've got to spend time with him and swimming around in his message and with his people and singing to him and studying his word. That's the only way to bring the glow back. And so I found that people that do that have the ability to sustain patterns of strangeness in the best of ways. But I also want to say that for me, I'm not always loving in this way. It's an already but not yet with me. I've got a little bit of this strange love and a little bit of that kind of natural love and a little bit of darkness in me. I'm in process. I'm not fully transformed. And I want to say that because my wife is here. Okay, I don't want to lie. And sometimes, hopefully sometimes. And I've got friends here. They're like, yeah, sometimes, Dave. And I've got my coworkers here. And so in all these ways, and my parents are here too, so it's like I've got all sorts of people that can tell me, Dave, you're in process. And that's exactly what I am. I'm already, but not yet. I'm saved, but being saved. And that's the language that the New Testament uses all the time. So, again, I want to just say those things up front, and hopefully maybe you can recognize some ways in which you've experienced this strange love coming alive in you. Or maybe you have a friend who's a Christian, and they seem to be a real Christian because they've got this strange kind of love coming alive in them. And maybe you could go back to them after this and say, hey, this preacher was talking about strange love, and I thought of you. And I just wanted to tell you that I really felt loved when you loved me like that. That'd be a great thing if that came out of this talk tonight. So here are the 4 categories I'm going to discuss: social love, romantic love, partnership love, and love and time, and how those intersect. So the first category, social love. What is the natural way to love when it comes to social love? I think the natural way to love is to love the insider. The insider. So that would be, we always tend to want to be connected to those who are in the inner circle, who are, you may call it, the popular kids, or the group of managers at work that you want to be a part of that group, or whatever it might be. But it's that inner circle. It's the draw to the inner circle. And one of my favorite writers and thinkers is a guy named C.S. Lewis. And he says it this way. We're going to have the quote behind us on the screen. You can read along with me. He says, I believe that in all men's lives at certain periods, and in many men's lives at all periods between infancy and extreme old age, one of the most dominant elements is the desire to be inside the local ring, and the terror of being left outside. This desire, in one of its forms, has indeed had ample justice done to it in literature. I mean in the form of snobbery. Victorian fiction is full of characters who are hag-ridden by the desire to get inside that particular ring, which is or was called society. Think of the show Bridgerton or something like this. But it must be clearly understood that society, in that sense of the word, is merely one of the 100 rings, and snobbery, therefore, only one form of the longing to be inside. People who believe themselves to be free, and indeed are free from snobbery, and who read satires on snobbery with tranquil superiority, may be devoured by the desire in another form. So what he's saying is, even if your desire is not to be a part of high society, you might be just as much drawn into the desire to be a part of some other inner ring, whatever that might be. And I find this to be true in my own life. Lewis goes on to say this. He says, unless you take measures to prevent it, this desire is going to be one of the chief motives of your life, from the first day on which you enter your profession until the day when you are too old to care. That will be the natural thing, the life that will come to you of its own accord. Any other kind of life, if you lead it, will be the result of conscious and continuous effort. If you do nothing about it, if you drift with the stream, you will in fact be an inner ringer. So he's basically saying, this is just the way it is. Everyone has some draw to some inner circle, We don't call it the same thing. It's not the same for all of us, but there's some inner ring that we have a desire to be a part of that if we're not a part of it causes us terror. And we feel it. And so you say, I don't know about that. I would just say, think about elementary school. Think about middle school. Think about high school. And I just caused each of you terror. Because each of those, elementary school, think about the inner ring you wanted to be a part of. Middle school, think about the inner ring. High school. Now those might be in different circles at every age, but I think we could probably all think about what were the inner rings that we desired to be a part of. Because it's natural. It's just the way it is. Now if Lewis is correct, if my experience is your experience at all, the question is, if that's natural light, what would the strange light of Christ look like when it comes to social love? Well, what we find is when we study the life of Jesus is that the way he loved in a social setting seemed completely free from this desire to be in the inner ring. It feels like Jesus wasn't drawn to that at all. In fact, it seems like he was drawn to the outsiders. Like you could just open Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John and study the life of Jesus, and almost on every page you would see him being drawn not to some inner circle, but he has this ultimate freedom to be drawn to the outsider. I'll just name a few. The Samaritan woman at the well, the tax collector, Zacchaeus, the parable of the Good Samaritan. All of these things are stories about Jesus speaking of the outsider as just as valuable as the insider. And so I guess it would be no surprise to find that when we live in the light of Christ, we too might have a strange freedom from the pull of the inner circle. And this new ability to see the outsider as God sees them would come alive to our eyes and our minds and our hearts. And I've had that experience. I was brutally enslaved to needing to be a part of the inner circle growing up. I would feel that terror, and now I feel freedom from it. Well, what got into me? I'm not just stronger than. I became something different. And the different thing is God living in me through his Spirit. And more as my life has gone, I've become something different than what I was. And I've experienced this freedom from the draw to the inner circle. I don't have time to go into my life story, but God has radically saved me from that. And this side of it's better, I'll tell you. To have the freedom to see insider or outsider as fully valuable creatures of God. In fact, one of my favorite things that C.S. Lewis says is, there are no ordinary people. You have never met a mere mortal. What he's saying is that every human being that exists is an immortal creature created in the image of God. And so they are just pregnant with potential and possibility and gifting and wonder. And so that's how I see the world now, whether you're on the inner circle or outside the inner circle. And that's how Jesus loved. And I'd say that's the first sign of people that are living with the strange love of Christ. That they see people different, and they make you know that you're valuable. They don't make you valuable, you already are, but they help you to see that you're valuable by the way they wonder at you and ask you questions and want to be with you. I can just tell you, pretty much none of you would have been friends with me in high school. Allie always reminds me, if we had met, you would have blown it, Dave. Don't you say that, Allie? Yeah, she always says that, and she's probably right. I was an idiot. I was caught up by something that kept me from the beauty in the world. Praise be to God. He's freed me from the draw of the inner circle. This is the strange love of Christ. And it is strange. Second category, romantic love. Romantic love. Now, what is the natural way to love in the romantic sphere? I think it's to love a person because what they might mean to you or for you, what they might be to you or for you. That's very natural. And I'm not even saying that, when I say natural, I'm not saying, oh, they're the worst. I'm just saying we naturally think like this. You've heard me maybe say this before, but I'll talk from a man's perspective at first because I'm a man. But when we're looking for a wife, the natural thing to do is, okay, I gotta see a fish and I gotta cast, and I'm looking for a particular kind of fish, and so I know which streams and ponds to fish in, and I'm trying to find a woman that would be a good wife, and I've got my own definition of what that means. And so I'm trying to find a good wife. Now, by the way, I think this same natural way works for women as well. But I'm not a woman, so I started with a man. Now, the reason I know that it's the same is because the TV show The Bachelorette is just as popular as the TV show The Bachelor. I know that because I used to watch that with some people in this church. One of them was up here doing announcements. And it's just as popular. I won't say her name. But I'm telling you, it's the same. Now, men might fish, but women, they're like predators. Okay, they're coming at you. So watch out, guys, because they get their eyes locked on you, you're done. Okay, fishermen, we're just pretty relaxed. But no, it's the same. It's natural. You could even say it's biological. This is the idea of peacocking. And actually, in peacocking, it's the males who are the ones with all the fancy feathers, because they're trying to get a woman to notice them. But this is different than the strange love of Christ. And so when the strange love of Christ flows through you in the romantic sphere, instead of asking, would this woman make a good wife or would this man make a good husband, we flip that question on their head and we say, would I make a good husband to that woman? Or would I make a good wife to that man? Could I be everything that God has instructed me to be as a husband to that woman? Could I be everything God has instructed me to be to that man as a wife? See how it's a different way of asking the question? So if you say, I don't know if I'm ready to be a husband to any woman, then I got to get to work. And I've got to grow and mature and become ready to be the kind of husband that I'm meant to be. Not just find a woman who can put up with my you-know-what. See how different that is? It's the strange love of Christ. So when we study the strange love of Christ, we actually see that God has instructed us to love like He loves. If you go to Ephesians chapter 5, another letter written by the Apostle Paul to the church in Ephesus, which is in modern-day Turkey, Paul writes this. He says, "Husbands, love your wives just as Christ loved the church and gave himself for her, to make her holy, cleansing her with the washing of water by the word. He did this to present the church to himself in splendor, without spot or wrinkle or anything like that, but holy and blameless. In the same way, husbands are to love their wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself." See how different that is than how we talk about romantic love in our day and age? This is strange love. And God says, I want you to, husbands, love your wives like Christ has loved the church. So there's two things that I just want to point out about this passage. First is that even though Jesus himself was never married, so he never married because God called him to singleness amongst other things. He's very unique, but Paul talks about the gift of singleness. So not everyone will be called to be married. That's important to understand. But many will get married. And even though Jesus was never married, he, in a sense, is married to the church. That's what Ephesians 5 tells us. And the scriptures are very clear on this, that the church, which is the collection of all true followers of Jesus that have lived, that's the church. It's like a spiritual entity. The scriptures say that's the bride of Christ. So in a sense, Jesus totally understands what it is to be a husband and to have a bride. And Jesus gave himself fully for his bride. And then Paul says, and husbands, you're supposed to be like that. That's the kind of strange love. And when we think about that, whoa, he gave himself fully for the church. What we realize is he gave himself before the church even existed or did anything. Gave him any worship, gave him any praise, gave him anything. Scriptures tell us, Romans 5:8 says this, but God proves his own love for us in that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. So this is a really important thing to understand if you're new to Christianity. We don't believe that because we're so good, then God died for us. We believe that God in Jesus died for us to make a way to be reconciled, to make a way to be wed, even before we responded to him. This is the strange way of love that we see first in the relationship of Christ with his church. Okay? Which brings me to the second thing that this passage reminds me of. And this is actually maybe the hardest thing to understand. But again and again, when you study the scriptures, what you realize is that it is far less important to be lovable and far more important to be loved or to allow yourself to be loved. Let me say that again. It is almost of no importance to be lovable and of ultimate importance to allow yourself to be loved. Now, this is a strange way to talk about love. But if you think about love in this way, it will utterly transform your romantic relationships. Now, how does this apply to the religious realm? Because I talked about Christ and his church. Okay, so trying to be lovable is being really religious. Because religion is all about trying to make yourself lovable to God, doing everything just right, avoiding all the wrong things, shaping up, putting on a good face, pretending it's all right, pretending you don't have doubts or questions. That's all being religious, and that is trying to make yourself lovable to God. But what did I just tell you about God's strange love? It says when we were still sinners, Christ died for us. He gave himself fully even before we had a chance to do anything. So then how can me being lovable enough have anything to do with what it means to be in relationship with God? The answer is it doesn't. So the opposite side of that coin is being adopted by grace, which is to say, allowing myself to be loved by God, to receiving that which Christ has done for me. Not being lovable, but being loved. And this is what Jesus in the New Testament teaches again and again and again. And it's so different than religion, and it's so different than making yourself lovable. Giving yourself and clothing yourself with the righteousness of Christ by grace through faith and by him sending his Spirit is completely different than you working hard to try to be that which God might accept. And this dichotomy, birthed in our vertical relationship with God, then flows out through our horizontal relationships with one another. I think particularly in our romantic relationships. Because so many of us are spending all of our time trying to be lovable, and we keep running into the wall. And we never are quite enough. And we always just end up feeling worse about ourselves. And so I would tell anybody, my best dating advice is find somebody who's already received and is able to receive love from God, because they're probably the only one that's not going to make you continually chase this need to be lovable. And I want that. I want that for men and women. I want that. If you have this love of God, then you're able to love your romantic partner in a way that might even seem totally foreign to you right now. So the thing for you to do is to figure out what this relationship with God looks like. Press pause on your romantic relationships and figure out the vertical, because only then will you be able to love someone where they are not chasing being lovable at every moment of every day of your relationship. It's just so tiring. Okay. Category 3. Partnership love. Now this is different than marriage love. This is like partnering with somebody on a joint mission. Now this includes marriage, because marriage is a mission as well. And I'll talk about that in a second. But this includes any type of partnership. So what's natural in these kinds of partnership love is that love exudes when we are successful. So for example, team sports. They always interview the winning team, and what does the athlete always say? I just love my teammates. They're all the best. And nobody's taking the microphone and camera into the losing locker room, and we're not so sure if they're exuding the love in the same way. And that's natural. I was into sports, and I get that. I loved my teammates so much when we won. And when we didn't, This happens in the work environment. Big earnings report, successful product launch, we made a big sale together. We express love in that relationship. We feel love, we express it. You're the best. I've got the best team. What about if earnings aren't so good? What about if that product launch failed? What about if we didn't make the sale? See, it's sort of natural. The natural way is to love when there is success. In a marriage relationship, if you have kids, when the kids perform well, there's a lot of love. When there's a great report card, when there's success on the sports field, when your kid makes first chair in the band, when, you see this? Love exudes. I love my partner. Look at what we did. We're awesome. So that's natural. But what is strange, and what you see less often, is when things don't go so well, and love is still expressed at the same magnitude. So we express love in our defeat. We have poor earnings, and yet I still love my team at work. Our kids are pretty average. They're like maybe below average. And I'm not saying that about my kids. I'm saying that just maybe your kids. just like super average. And that's great, but we still feel like we did it, like we're a team. Like that's strange. And it's not natural. So, when you study the Gospels in particular, the way you see this playing itself out is Jesus exuding love for his disciples, primarily the 12 disciples that we know about, that were kind of his closest friends and teammates, you could say, during his earthly ministry. The way he loved them primarily in the wake of disappointment and failure. Like if you study these Gospels, you will see again and again that Jesus' closest friends and teammates that were on mission with him, they weren't very impressive. They were like average at best. They were always doubting. They were always saying, I don't know, that seems like a bad plan, Jesus, let's do this way. And Jesus would be like, guys, you were, what? Do you know what you're doing before this? You don't know. And they were always messing up. And the craziest thing about the Gospels, if you don't know much about the Bible, like, well, how can we trust that the stories we have here are true? I think one of the best reasons you can trust this, and one of the reasons that secular historians trust that we have a very reliable account of at least how these were written in their original documents, is because these 12 dudes still look as bad as they look. Because you would think, sort of as St. Peter's was being built, that they might scrub out some of the stuff about how Peter denied Jesus 3 times when Jesus was arrested. Well, why wouldn't we just take that out so Peter doesn't look so bad, so we could build the cathedral in Rome, But they don't. The scribes who took the original documents and made copies of them by hand had so much reverence that this was not just human writings, but these were in fact the inspired words of God, that they kept in all of those warts, all of those ugly passages, all of those doubting Thomases. They kept them all in there because actually it's the way Jesus loved his disciples despite their lack of success that reveals the strange love of Christ. And that is so refreshing to me, honestly. That God doesn't just love me because I accomplish the mission he's given me. He loves me for me, regardless of how successful I am in doing the things he's asked me to do. And that's the same way he loved his first disciples. It's the same way he would love you if you chose to follow Jesus. And it's a strange love, but it's compelling. And I think the world recognizes when they see this kind of love, this sort of loyal love, this sort of love that exudes regardless of outcome. And the way I'll share this, and this may go over some of your heads, but I was a big basketball fan, so I like to do basketball analogies. But it's the phenomenon of LeBron James versus Steph Curry. Now, if you know the story, LeBron James is, by all measures, he scored more points than anyone that's ever scored points in the NBA. He's truly like a dominant, he's the closest thing to a demigod that there is. This guy is giant. He flies through the air. He's incredible. He has highlights galore. There's so much to love about him. His life off the court seems immaculate. He's a family man. He isn't surrounded by scandal. And yet, there is a real split amongst basketball fans about whether we love or hate LeBron James. And it's a kind of a strange phenomenon, because what's there not to like? Well, what's there not to like is that LeBron James left his unsuccessful team, the team that he started with, even though he was already the best player in the NBA, and he left that team to go join two other superstars in Miami. The difference between him and Steph Curry is Steph Curry stayed with the team that drafted him through the ups and the downs. Now, both of them have won the same number of championships, and yet, for the most part, Steph Curry is sort of beloved by all. And you say, well, why is that? I think it's an example of how even the world recognizes that the kind of love that stays with the team, even when it's unsuccessful, is a better kind of love. It's a silly example, but I see it time and time again played out in the world, that it's like the world can recognize the two kinds of love. And I think the one kind of love, which is sort of the loyal love of Christ, is not natural but strange, but it is more compelling. And you can't help but see it when it shines in the night sky. And so that's sort of my hope for you when it comes to this kind of love, is that someone might ask you maybe at some time in your life, hey, why are you so strangely loyal? Why don't you get off of that team and join that team? And maybe you have sort of a sustained witness to that, and you can say, well, the answer is because Christ is strangely loyal to me, even when I'm falling short. He doesn't abandon me. He doesn't leave me to go find somebody new. So I think that gives me a little extra endurance, even when things aren't going well. So that's the third category, partnership love. Now the last category is love and time. So what is the natural way to love with regard to time? If you know me, I like to think about time a lot. That's why I love Christopher Nolan movies. I can't help. I just get sucked in. I don't know what that is. I just love thinking about time and how it all plays out. And I don't think we quite understand time. But when it comes to love and time, I think the natural way to love is to see love like it's on a timer that tick, tick, ticks and will eventually run out. So we've got to strike when the iron's hot. We've got to sort of get as much love in it as we can before the love goes away. And I think this is kind of the natural way to experience love. You just sort of assume it won't last forever. You try to maximize it. And then when it ends, you say, well, that's just the way it is. That's just the natural way. Love always fades. And it's sort of the reality. And maybe we used to be worried about that, but we've gotten honest with ourselves as a society, and that's just the way it is. Now, recently I saw a childhood friend of mine post on Instagram, and because they posted on Instagram, I feel like it's okay to talk about it today. We can talk about whether you agree. I'll be as vague as I can be, but this person announced that they were getting a divorce after 18 years of marriage. And the phrasing that they used, and that's why I'm bringing it up, I think was just expressive of this very natural way of viewing love and time. So they said something to the effect of, I'm writing this post to let you know that we're ending our marriage after 18 years, but I want to celebrate that because that's a long run. And I want to celebrate that, we made it as long as we did. And, basically they're saying, and it's natural, love fades, the time ran out, and so we're going our own ways. And then they said this, they said, when we aren't the same people that we were when we got married. And so you hear them saying, it's natural then that our love would end because we're not the same iteration of person that we were when we first got married. And I think this is a very, very common story. I just never seen it put that way in an Instagram post before, so it struck me. And I said, is this true? Is this the way love and time work? And then I started to think about it, and I realized, well, that's the way it naturally works. But there is a strange way that love works, and it's the strange way that we read about God's love for us in the Scriptures. And the difference, you could say, you could characterize natural love as like consumer love, and God's love is covenantal love. And covenantal love is this strange love. And God reveals this kind of love to us in the pages of Scripture, and He says it's completely independent on time or iteration. So He says, I'm going to love you forever. It's an unending love, and I'm going to love you through every iteration of yourself, because I don't just love this iteration, I love the person who exists in each iteration. And He was like this with the people of Israel, and Jesus was like this with His disciples, and God is like that with His people now. That He loves you not because of the iteration you're in, He loves you because of the person you are. And that's not just because that person is great or lovable, remember we talked about that before, but because He chooses to love you. And once He loves you, He will never stop loving you. And this is so strange. Why will God keep on loving us no matter what we do? And the answer is because He's a covenantal God. When He chooses you forever. Now, we see this love now played out through God's people. And Paul is encouraging in 1 Corinthians, the church in Corinth, which is in Greece, he's encouraging the church to love like God loves. And so you've maybe heard this at weddings before. So I'll read it for you in case you've forgotten it. This is 1 Corinthians 13. It says this, love is patient, love is kind, love does not envy, it is not boastful, it is not arrogant, it is not rude, it is not self-seeking, it is not irritable, and it does not keep a record of wrongs. Love finds no joy in unrighteousness, but rejoices in the truth. It bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Love never ends. And you're like, yeah, I've heard that at a wedding. And every wedding I nod along. Yeah, that's true. But you're probably, if you're not yet a Christian, you're probably living in what I would call the Christian hangover of Western civilization. Because you hear that at every wedding. And you're like, yeah, that's true. But when you actually think about love and time, you think more like the Instagram post. That's my guess. And we're finally starting to get honest as a society. We're started coming out of our hangover, and we're like, yeah, that 1 Corinthians 13, that's ridiculous. And if you're a fan of Owen Wilson and the Wedding Crashers, you get this. Because they can always pick. They go to weddings and they crash it, and they always know it. They're guessing. They take bets on, is it going to be 1 Corinthians 13, or is it going to be these other passages that are common at wedding? Which is to say, it's become a joke. Because we all know that love's not patient. Love's not kind. We know it doesn't endure. We know that love never ends. It always fades. It's tick, tick, tick. That's natural. But I would tell you that there is still the strange love of Christ active in the world. And there is a kind of love that never ends. And it's sourced from above, but it can extend horizontally. And you too can love with the strange love of God. You can have a love that's patient. You can have a love that endures. You can have a love that never ends. It's not a joke. But you can't manifest it on your own. The natural way is the way that fades. But with the love of Christ, with God working in you, you can have the love of 1 Corinthians 13. So, I just did a wedding last night, and I read these traditional vows, and they are truly beautiful. But again, we've heard them so many times that we forget what they're saying. And they're expressing covenantal love. So I'll read them to you. To have and to hold from this day forward. For better, for worse. For richer, for poorer. In sickness and in health. To love and to cherish. And you could add, in this iteration and the next iteration. Till death do us part. That is the covenantal of Christ flowing through the marriage covenant. And it's still active. There are still strange married people who believe this is true. And they love with an enduring and patient love. And they love every iteration of the person, because nobody's lying who's been married more than 5 years. The person you marry is not the person that you die with. There are so many iterations. You do change. You do become a different person. You do transform, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer. There is sickness and there is health. And there are people who can love every iteration. And when you meet those people and they truly seem in love, I dare you to ask them why that is. Ask them what got in them. I bet more often than not, it'll have something to do with the way God loved them first. That's what the Bible teaches. That's what Jesus offers. That's what Jesus showed us in his life. Yes, Jesus also says, if there's infidelity, if there's abuse, if there's abandonment, if there's neglect, that I don't want you to stay in those unhealthy marriages. So I want to say that for any of you who may have experienced divorce. But he's saying the strange hope of Christ is that your marriage can be filled with love till death do you part. But it takes both parties in a Christian marriage loving with the strange love of Christ every day. And when they fall short, asking for forgiveness. So it is there. Love doesn't have to fade. The strange love of Christ is something that isn't ticking away, but hopefully growing day by day stronger when you come to an understanding and the knowledge of who God is and what he's done for you in Jesus Christ. So, my charge to you is this. To the best of God's ability in you, be strange. Be strange this Christmas. Be strange around the Christmas dinner table. Be strange in your conversations. See people like God sees them. Love them with this strange love. and be stars in the world. Let's pray.